Today, I'm in Milford, Ohio. Let's check it out. This is part 2 of my series on Milford, Ohio. Check out the others for the full story. The Stephen Medaris House was built in 1822, the second brick home ever raised in Milford. In those early years, a brick house meant a great deal. Milford was barely a settlement then. The village wouldn't even be incorporated for another 14 years. Almost everything around it was log or frame, quick to throw up, cheap, and what nearly everyone could afford. Brick was a different world. To build in brick, you needed a kiln, and clay dug and shaped and fired on site. You needed skilled masons who knew how to lay a true wall, and you needed the money to pay for it all while it went up. The brick house was a statement, one that said the man who built it intended to stay and could afford to say so in the most permanent material available. So when Stephen Medaris raised the second brick house in 1822, he was marking himself, in the plainest terms the frontier had, as a man with means. The house was remodeled in 1974, with an addition put on at the time. So what stands today is that original 1822 core, grown and updated over 2 centuries. Now my research on this house turned up a story about another Medaris that's too good to leave out. I want to be straight with you up front. I could not connect the two by family line. A surname this rare in a town this small probably points to a connection somewhere back down the branches, but I didn't find the link, so I'm not going to claim one. Major General John Medaris was born right here in Milford in 1902, and he grew up to run America's early rocket program. In 1955, he took command of the Army Ballistic Missile Agency at Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, Alabama. And it was there, under his command, that the agency put America's first satellite into orbit, Explorer 1. Launched January 31st, 1958, the country's answer to the Soviet Sputnik that had stunned the world a few months earlier. The general's life reads almost like a novel. Unbelievable. He lied about his age at 16 to get into the Marines. He served in the First World War. He made a fortune in business, and then he lost it. He came through 300 days of combat in the Second World War without a scratch. And after all of that, the wars, the missiles, the race into space, he retired, entered the church, and was ordained an Episcopal priest in 1970. So is there a thread running from the general back to the early Medaris family who built this brick home in 1822? That I can't tell you, but it's a heck of a story either way. Reverend Francis McCormick, the man we met in the opening segment of part 1, came to what would become Milford in 1797 and built the first cabin here. He was a Revolutionary War veteran who'd served under Lafayette at Yorktown before receiving his 1,000-acre Ohio land grant, and he planted Methodism in the Northwest Territory, first here at Milford and later at his own village of Salem over by Anderson, where his body rests in the church graveyard. McCormick started that first congregation in his own cabin, which still stands today, albeit with additions built all around it, making the cabin itself unrecognizable. The church met there until it reached about 20 believers, just about all the cabin would hold. So they moved to the larger cabin of Reverend Philip Gatch, who'd come to the area in 1798, and met there until the group had grown past 56. That's when the early congregation decided to build a place of its own, a log chapel, up by 1806, near the present corner of Main and High Streets. But it kept growing. By 1818, they needed still more room, and they put up the building behind me, the congregation's second church, raised on the same ground and offering more space. It was here in 1828 that they started a Sunday school, and when they outgrew even this, they consecrated their present church on Christmas Day, 1836, the building where the congregation still worships today. One architectural detail worth mentioning, those 2 front doors. In the early days, it was common in Methodist churches, and other denominations too, to have 2 separate entrances, one for men and one for women. That's right, the 2 sexes sat on opposite sides of the sanctuary. And here's what I love about this building. Those 2 doors are still here. Even now that the old church has been converted into a private residence, today they open into 2 halves of a duplex. The architecture still remembers how this congregation once sat 200 years after the fact. The Millcroft sits on the choicest parcel of land in all of Old Milford, at the corner of Mill and Water Streets. This is lot number 1. As we learned earlier, when John Hagman laid out the village in 46 lots, this was the prize. It sold for $35 when most of the others went for $25. There had been a mill on this ground for years by the time the Kuglers arrived. A bankrupt operation the family picked up out of foreclosure. When John Kugler came over from the New Germany settlement in 1828, now called Camp Dennison, the family bought lot number 1 for $12,000, and that price included the mill and an unfinished house. Some sources trace the start of that house all the way back to 1812. What we know for certain is that by around 1830, Kugler had finished it, and it stands behind me today. At first it served as both a general store and living quarters for the family, before it was converted into what became known as the Kugler Mansion. And it was during these years that Kugler raised the stone stable on the parcel, the one we looked at earlier. After Kugler's death in 1868, the mill and the mansion drift apart in the record. The village bought up the mill race and gradually filled it in, which made the old mill harder and harder to run. By 1888, it had been converted to steam power, and around 1920, it caught fire and was destroyed. The mansion, though, survived, Up until 1939, it stayed as a private residence. Then it opened as a tea room called the Millcroft, and from that point on, it changed hands almost constantly, spending most of the next century as one restaurant or shop after another. The name you still hear today, the Millcroft, dates to about 1941, when the Millcroft's former gift shop manager took the place over and rechristened it. It was during his run that the house and the stone stable were joined together by a large commercial kitchen. In the mid-1990s, the name changed again to Mill Street Manor, and then the building was very nearly lost for good. A developer bought the Millcroft and planned to tear it down before it was rescued and redeveloped instead. Today, the historic fabric, the house, and the stone stable both survive. As part of Cincinnati Distilling at the Millcroft, a working distillery inside the Kugler's historic home, with a full-service restaurant, a bar, and a rooftop looking out over Old Milford and the Little Miami. Fitting use, too, because Kugler once ran a whiskey distillery of his own, just a few doors down. 412 Main Street. This building went up in 1881, the first government building the village of Milford ever built for itself. Milford had already been an incorporated village for 45 years by then. All that time, the town governed itself without a home of its own. Councils met wherever they could, a rented room, a member's shop, wherever there was space. So 1881 is the year Milford's government finally got 4 walls to call its own, and it packed a lot into these walls. Under one roof, this single building was 3 things at once. It was the town's legislature, the council chamber, where the village's business got argued out and decided. It was the town's polling place, where Milford came to cast its votes, and it was the town's jail. The jail might be putting it grandly. A village lockup like this was often called by an older name, a calaboose. And it wasn't a prison so much as a holding cell, a place to let Saturday night troublemakers sleep it off, or to hold someone for a night or two before the real facility down in Batavia, the county seat, took over anything serious. So this was the small end of the law, the drunk and disorderly, the overnight guests, the local disturbance. But the small jail does play a part in a much bigger story that I will tell in another video. Look for the video called The Mob That Failed on my page out later next week. Put those 3 together and you've got a whole machine of a small town packed into a modest building, a place where Milford made its laws, cast its ballots, and locked up the occasional troublemaker, all under a single roof. It's a snapshot of just how small and how human local government was in rural areas.